Welcome back to my workshop. Now today we're going to talk about these things, okay? What is it? Well, it's a square. I know it's not square, but it is a square. Now I'm not a roofer, I'm not a carpenter, I just make stuff. And I've had one of these in my toolbox for years. And I've used it for drawing 45s and right angles, but it's got so many other uses, okay? Let's have a quick look and see what this really is. Right, so what actually is this? Now this is known as either a Swanson square or a Swanson speed square or a Rafter square or a carpenter's square. It's got so many different names. Now the reason it might be called a Swanson square is because this was, in this format, was invented by a guy called Swanson in 1925 in America. Okay, so that's almost a brand name. Now this is not a genuine Swanson square, this is a cheap copy, but I've been using it for years, it's fantastic. But I have this in different forms, okay? I've got this one, which is a 12-inch Stanley, and I've got these ones, which are equivalents, but they're metric, okay? But before we start looking into what all of these bits and pieces do on here, let's try and iron out the differences between this sort of square and other types of squares. Right, so as we've discussed quickly, now this is a speed square, okay, used for general carpentry, which we're going to go through all of these numbers. What do they all do? How do you use it? But we're going to try and do it really quickly. But other types of square are this type of square. Okay, now this is a framing square. Okay, this is a small one. You can get them in bigger ones like this, but I can't fit it on the camera. Okay, so that is a framing square. And here, most carpenters will know, this is a tri-square. Okay, that's used for general woodworking. They come in all different sizes, but the basic construction is the same. It's just basically an L shape where this bit is wider than this bit. Okay, so that's a tri-square or a carpenter square. You also get these, which are engineer's squares. Now these tend to be metal. Okay, this is a nice sexy little set. Okay, and these are used mainly by metal workers, but I use them in the workshop because these can be used for setting up blades, etc., for when you're setting up your workshop material. Also, you've got this type of square, which is a combination square. Okay, so this is a variable or adjustable square, so you can select your angles and draw your angles here. Okay, all of these are used in my workshop for various different reasons. But what we're going to concentrate on is this, and what I'll do is I'll use this one so we can actually see all the big numbers and what they all do. Right, stop mucking about, let's have a look. Right, so the first thing is to look at all these numbers. What do they all mean? Now this is obviously just a general rule. Now these are in inches on this particular one. As I said, I've got a metric equivalent here. I won't go into that too much at the moment. Let's establish what we got here. So these are measurements in inches. Now each of these inches are relevant to this point here. Now this is the pivot point, which we'll discuss in a moment. Okay, so everything starts from here. Okay, also on this side here, we have some more scales on the inside. They also refer to this edge here. Okay, so 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, etc., etc. Okay, on this edge here, we have angles. Now all of these angles, again, are relevant to this position here at the pivot point. I'll show you that in a second. But we've got some more numbers here that most people don't use. Okay, these are hip and valley values and common rafter values. Okay, I'll cover that very quickly in a second. The overall look of the thing, we've got a lip here. Okay, so if you look, there's a lip here, and that is used for when you've got your piece of wood. I'll just use this bit of MDF for now so it's nice and clear. The lip here pushes up and squares against your piece of work. Okay, now most of us have used a square for doing this. You put your lip on, okay, and this gives you a right angle, okay, which we know is obviously 90 degrees. Okay, other things you might have used it for is you flip it around like this, and here you've got a 45-degree angle. Okay, so again, going from our origin point here, you draw a line, that gives you a 45 degrees angle. Okay, that's great, we've all used it like that. But what about these angles here? How do you use those? Now, obviously we've drawn our 90-degree angle here. Okay, but what if I wanted to draw a 30-degree angle? Now what I do is, using this where the lip is, okay, using this line as a reference, so this part here, okay, we move from our pivot point here, we move our square, okay, until these numbers here line up with this line here. So for example, if we want a 30, so this is 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So we line up our 30-degree angle here, okay, then strike our line here, and that gives us 30 degrees between our vertical line and our new line. Okay, so exactly the same principle can be had if you want to do, say, a 15-degree angle. Okay, line up this line here, keeping your pivot point in the same place, strike your line. This gives us our 15-degree angle here. Okay, you get the idea. So that is basically a protractor. All of the angles you select there, you can go all the way up to 90 degrees, but that would be a bit silly because you've got your 90 degree here. Right, so that's that as a protractor. What about this measurement here? Okay, so these numbers on this edge here, obviously these ones are in inches. You can use those just for basically marking out distances, so like 6 inches, 4 inches, whatever. Instead of using your conventional tape measure, okay, which can, obviously you can do it at a bit of an angle and you could get that slightly wrong, but this is going to be repeatable each time. Obviously exactly the same with a metric square, but this one is obviously in millimeters. Okay, another benefit of using this measurement here is these little divots here. Okay, if I wanted to draw, say, a 3-inch line across here, okay, I could mark my 3 inches here, I could come along, mark 3 inches here, and then join them up with a line. Okay, but there's a quicker way. If you just look at here, the 3 inches, this divot lines up with that. This next divot on the other side, that's 3 1/4, 3 1/2, 3 3/4, and then 4. Okay, this is obviously the same on a metric one, but obviously in metric. But if I wanted to draw a 3-inch line across, all I do is keeping my lip up against the edge of the wood here. I put my pencil in this little divot here, if you can see, and then move my square, and it gives me an exactly 3-inch line, okay, from this edge to here. And obviously you can do that 2 1/2, 2. Okay, all of these lines are parallel, and that's just using these divots. Now if I wanted a 2 3/4 line, you get the idea. So that's what these divots are for. Right, moving on. Now if I wanted to find the middle point of this piece of wood here, or this MDF, okay, we know how big it is. It's, oh God, it's 10 1/2 centimetres. Oh, that's a bit, right, what's the middle of that? Now there's a couple of ways you can find the middle of that using your square here. One quick way is strike a line at a right angle, okay, move it to 45, strike a line, flip it over, put this back on your point here, strike a line, okay, and this point here is exactly halfway. Okay, that's one way to find the middle of it. Another way, now if you're anything like me and your maths isn't very good, there's another way you can find out the middle of this piece of wood. Now obviously this is just over 4 inches, so 4 and a bit, so we know it's going to be 2.5 of a little bit. Okay, that's not a very good measurement, is it? But what you can do, if there's something you know the value of, okay, so we'll say 6, because we know exactly half of 6 is 3. So what we can do is we can keep in our pivot here, we can move this round until the 6 inches lines up with the opposite edge, and we know exactly half of that is 3, which is here. Okay, so that should be exactly half the width of that board. Okay, it doesn't matter which measurement you use, providing you can divide it by 2. So we'll go 8, for example. 8, half of 8 is 4. Okay, now these 2 lines should be the middle of the board. Right, that's enough of finding the centre. Right, another way to use these, which is very handy, you can use this as a guide or a fence for if you're using a circular saw. Now, if you're cutting a piece of material, obviously you want to cut it straight. I'll quickly show you how to use this and that to cut something at a right angle. Right, so I'm just going to use my sacrificial piece of MDF here again. If I wanted to cut this off, so this is right angle, okay? Obviously I use it as conventional, strike my line, okay? I want to cut along that line. Now there's loads of ways to do it. Obviously you can just freehand it, but one way to do it is obviously line up your circular saw here where you would see the blade to be cut, and then use that as a guide. Now I would tend to use it this way. I'll explain why in a second, but let's just cut that and make sure it all works okay. So I'm just using, keep the circular saw against the fence and cut. Okay, so that is now a right angle. Now, why did I use it that way and not this way? Well, you can use it this way, but the issue is when you're starting off, you haven't got much of this contacting this fence, okay? So you can easily start off a wobbly angle. But if you do it this way, you get more of your circular saw pressing against the fence so you can get a straight start. I hope that makes sense. Let's move on to something else. So what's next? We covered this, which is the lip. We covered the pivot point, which is obviously our main point where it pivots. Covered this, which is the a measurement from this edge. We've covered these, which is a measurement from this edge. We've covered these little divots, okay, so we know what they're for now. And we've covered these, which are angles, okay. The next thing we haven't covered is these. Now, this is a different set of numbers. They're angles, but they're actually ratios. Okay, now this top one here is hip and valley values, and this one here is common rafter values. Now, let me quickly explain. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm not a roofer, so if any of you roofers out there can pull me up on any of my terminology or correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll quickly try and explain what these are. Right, I'm going to quickly try and explain how you use these numbers here, okay? Now, these are common rafter numbers, okay? We'll go on to the hip and valley in a moment. But if you're building a roof, okay, you'll have your, I presume it's called a ridge beam, okay? This is at the very peak of your roof, okay? And this is what the rafters actually go against. And you'll also have your, here's your wall. Okay, so this is a beam's got to go from here onto the top of the wall. Okay, now how do you get these angles? Okay, so the beam is going to go along here, like this, okay, like this, like that, and like that. Okay? So you've probably all seen those. I'm not a roofer, but I need to know how to find this angle, okay, and this angle, and this angle. So how do I use this to find those angles? Now, if you've got an existing part of the roof, you can actually use this to measure. Let me quickly show you on here. Okay, I've only drawn this roughly, but what you can do is using your square and a small spirit level, okay, you can put your pivot point on the top of the rafter there, okay, put your square on the top, pivot it until your bubble is level. Okay, once it's level, okay, then you can read off these values here. Okay, now in this case, I've only done it approximately, and this is giving me a common rafter value of 4. So what does that mean? Okay, because this is an imperial speed square, okay, the common rafter values are given in inches, okay, and this is over 12 inches. So what the 4 means is for every 12 inches, it will rise by 4 inches. Okay, so this would be a 412 pitch roof. Okay, and what that gives you is this angle here. It's actually an angle, okay, it's this angle or this angle, but that is just a ratio. The 412 is a ratio which gives you your slope of your roof. Okay, there's another quick method of checking that as well. Okay, and the other method is using a plumb bob. Okay, most of you will probably know what a plumb bob is. It's literally you hold it and it gives you a plumb line. Okay, so that's a line that goes direct to the center of the earth. Okay, but what you can do is you can lay your line across the top of your square. Okay, I'll try not to get in the way here. And then you can use it at the pivot point again. Same pivot point on the corner of your ridge beam. Okay, turn this until the plumb line is exactly plumb with your square. You probably can't see that because my arm's probably in the way. And then this will give you your common rafter value. Okay, there is an equivalent angle, but we're doing it in the ratio. I hope that makes sense. I hope that made some sense. Obviously, it's not very clear because I'm just doing it off of a drawing I've done on the whiteboard. But the basic principle is using this plumb line on the pivot point, you rotate your square until the plumb line, okay, is level with this edge, and then you read off your common rafter value. Okay, what do we do with that value? Let me show you. Okay, so let's imagine this is our rafter we're going to cut. Now we now know that it's a 4. And what we do is we actually put the pivot point on the edge of our piece of wood on the corner here. Okay, and we want our 4. So what we do, keeping the pivot there, move this around until we get to the 4. Okay, and then we strike our line here. Okay, so that now gives us our plumb cut. So let me quickly cut that and then we'll see if it fits. Right, so I've now cut this, which is our 4 common rafter cut, which is this angle here. Let's just see if it's any good on our drawing. Okay, you got to give me some allowance here because it's only a drawing. Right, let's move over to the board again. Okay, so this is our ridge cut, which I hope is going to line up with this. Okay, that's pretty close. But what we've got to do now is figure out what this angle is, and obviously this bit here, okay? Well, it should be fairly simple because this is vertical, okay? We need this to be vertical, and we need this to be vertical. So we can use our 4 again to cut these. Now this obviously depends on how long your roof is going to be, and this obviously depends on how far it is from here to here. Now there's some fancy calculations which I have no idea how to do it. If I'm going from an existing beam, I can do some measurements. In this case, I'm going to measure off the drawing because I'm cheating. Okay, so this entire length here, we'll go 16 inches, and from there to there, we'll go 14.5. Okay, that should be easy enough. Okay, so all I want to do is first of all do my 16 inches. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to find our 16-inch mark here, okay, which is the top of our rafter. Okay, that's our 16-inch mark. We know it's going to go off at this angle like this somehow. Okay, but the problem we've got is we can't do it as we did before because we haven't got enough room. Okay, there's not enough space here to carry on with our measurement. So what we can do is flip it round. Okay, so this is where we want it to start from, and we can spin it around until we get to our common rafter value of 4 here. Okay, so make sure you use the common rafter scale. Don't get it mixed up and use the hip and valley value. So it's our common rafter value of 4. This point is still there. Our pivot point is connected to the wood. Okay, we can make our mark. Okay, and while we're here, use exactly the same. We'll go up to our 14.5 inches. Okay, which is here. And we'll do exactly the same. Okay, point here, move it around to our common rafter value here is on the 4. Okay, that gives us a parallel line here, and we know now our bird's mouth has got to come off this way somehow. Okay, this is our bird's mouth. Do this cutout here. I'm going to cover this very quickly. This is called a bird's mouth. Now all we need to know is how big this piece of wood is, and then we've got to draw a perpendicular line between this and that. So we just need to know how wide that is. In this case, this is, I'm going to use metric here because I'm an idiot, 70 mil. Let's draw that out on there. I'll show you how to use that. All right, so to cut our bird's mouth out, which we know is going to be along here somewhere. Now this line is obviously got to be perpendicular to this. Now if you look on your square, I'll show you on here because it's nice and clear. There's a line here. Okay, it's exactly the same on there. There's another one here, that line, and also on here. Okay, and what you do is you line those lines up with this line. Okay, and then your 70 mil measurement that we just took, okay, comes along here, which I think is about there. Then that point has got to be there. So once this point is in the right place and your lines are in line like that, okay, you strike a line and you cut out this. Okay, that's your bird's mouth. I'll quickly cut that out and we'll see if it fits. All right, so I'll quickly cut this out here. This is our bird's mouth. Okay, let's take it over to the drawing and see if it fits. Obviously in real life this will be completely different. Okay, let's just mount you on here. Okay, and does it fit? Yeah, that's close enough. So you've got your bird's mouth and you've got your plumb line here. You've got your proper roof rafter angle. Yeah, obviously this bit here can be trimmed off using the same method you used here to give that a parallel line. Anyway, that's enough of cutting a rafter. Is there anything else on the square we can use it for? Right, another quick use. Now this is a bit ropey, but it does work. Now if we wanted to cut a hole in here, maybe to put a pipe through or something like that, you select the center of where you want the hole to be. Now in my case, I'm going to put a screw in there, but you can quite easily use a nail or something like that. Now, how big do I want my circle? I want it to be, let's say about 3 inches here. Okay, now I can either pivot on this point here, which is a bit ropey sometimes, or I can put it in here. Okay, find my line that I've just marked, and then you can basically move that around. Okay, it probably helps if you've got a pencil with a longer edge. Okay, and just basically pivot around that point. Pivot. Oh, come on. Okay, I think you get the idea. So you can basically use this as a compass. Okay, so there's your circle. You can now cut that out and stick your pipe through it. Yeah, that'll do. So we've covered what these are, we've covered what that is, we've covered what this is, we've covered what these are, we've covered what this is, we've covered what that is. The only thing we haven't covered is this hip and valley values. Now these are very similar to the common rafter values, okay, but these are for hips and valleys. So that's where you've got your pitched roof and you've got another pitched roof coming off at a different angle. So this can get a bit complicated, okay. Whereas on this one, we was using our 4, okay, so that was 12 inches along, 4 inches up, okay. This one uses a different scale. I think this uses 17 inches along by the rise, okay, so it's slightly different. Okay, a bit more complicated for me. I'm probably never going to make a roof like that, but if I do, then I'll have to learn how to use it. We've also covered this line here, which is used for drawing perpendicular lines, which we used when we was doing our bird's mouth. So that basically is all of the things on here that I can think of. That's enough, isn't it? Right, I think that'll just about do it. That's just to cover some of the bits and pieces that these things can do. I mean, as I say, I've been using these for years, but I've only ever used them for drawing a right angle and drawing a 45. Okay, but they do so much more. I'm not an expert, I'm not a roofer, I'm not a carpenter, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what all these other values are. Similar values on an imperial one and a metric one. That's just to give you an idea. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you've gathered something from this. It should give you an idea of how much you can use these things. All right. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Right, I'm going to trick... but I've got various other forms of this. This is not going very well. Let's try that again because that was a bit crap.